Listen very carefully, because what I'm about to tell you was never meant to leave the walls of Lyon. In 1923, a single family name was whispered like a curse. Hartwell. A line of wealth, elegance, and madness. 5 wives. 5 different women. All married into the same bloodline. And every single one of them lost their mind. Not slowly. Not gently. Violently. Publicly. As if something inside the Hartwell home reached into their skulls and rewired them from the inside out. But this isn't just a tragic story. This is a pattern. One that repeats across history, across continents, wherever power corrupts deeper than the surface. Because the Hartwells were not just another noble family. They were part of a network. A circle older than politics, older than religion. And what happened behind their locked doors was not insanity, it was initiation. Before we go deeper, I need you to understand something. This story will change the way you think about reality itself. Because the Hartwell wives did not go insane on accident. They were broken with precision. Their minds were dismantled in ways that modern psychology still refuses to acknowledge. This was engineered, designed, purposeful. And it was done to protect something buried in that house, something people in high places would kill to keep hidden. Tonight, I am not here to entertain you. I am here to drag the truth out of the shadows, one layer at a time. You will feel it the deeper we go, like cold fingers tightening around your spine. Because you and I, we're about to step into a timeline that was meant to be erased. You are about to see how institutions use marriage as a weapon. How history is rewritten to hide ritual. How madness is manufactured to silence witnesses. And when you finally understand what happened to those 5 women, you might start to notice the same patterns in today's world. Different faces, same system, same hunger for control. So take a breath, look over your shoulder, and step into the Hartwell estate with me. The doors are already open, but once you enter, there is no walking back into the light. The Hartwell estate did not sit on land, it fed on it. The locals in Lyon said the soil beneath it was older than the city itself. Ancient foundations. Whispers of pagan shrines buried under stone. The mansion was massive, elegant, but wrong. Its proportions felt off, like every hallway led somewhere you weren't supposed to go. The servants never stayed long. They complained of voices in the walls, footsteps that followed them, mirrors that didn't reflect the truth. But the Hartwell men? They never seemed affected. They walked through that place like it obeyed them. Like they weren't residents, but heirs to something that owned the land long before houses existed. The first wife, Elise Marquette, married into the family in 1891. Bright, educated, fiercely independent. Within 6 months, she was found standing in the courtyard at midnight, barefoot in the snow, reciting numbers in a language no one recognized. They said her eyes were wide open, but she couldn't see. She lived the rest of her life in an asylum, screaming every night until her voice broke. The newspapers called it female hysteria. Convenient. The second wife, Madeline, lasted longer. 3 years. She began writing letters, wild, frantic descriptions of rooms that didn't exist and doors that appeared only at night. She wrote about a basement beneath the basement. A chamber with symbols carved into the stone that glowed when touched. The final letter said only this: they are not husbands. They are gatekeepers. No one ever found her. No funeral. No body. They said she ran away. But witnesses saw men in black coats load a large trunk into a carriage the night she vanished. The Hartwells paid the police to stay silent. And silence is the greatest currency. What if I told you the wives didn't go insane? They saw something they were never allowed to see. This isn't just a family tragedy. This is a blueprint. A system that breaks anyone who gets too close to the source. And every man watching this needs to understand. Some legacies are not built on power. They are built on sacrifice. The question isn't why the wives went mad. The real question is, what truth did they uncover right before they did? By the time the third wife arrived, the town already spoke of the Hartwell curse. Her name was Isabella, a woman of faith with a calm spirit and unshakable conviction. She believed prayer could cleanse any darkness, until Lyon swallowed her whole. The moment she stepped into the estate, something inside her shifted. The servants said she walked differently after the first night. Slower. Like she was listening for something. Within weeks, she started asking questions no one dared to ask. Why were entire wings of the mansion sealed? Why did the Hartwell men host midnight gatherings with no music, no laughter, just chanting behind locked doors? Why were there no family portraits older than 50 years, despite their lineage stretching back centuries? Isabella was intelligent. Too intelligent. She kept a journal hidden beneath the loose floorboards of her room. In it, she described the ceremony of the veil. Guests arrived wearing white gloves. They carried objects wrapped in red cloth. Men whispered in a circle while women sat silent, heads bowed as if under a spell. At the center of the room stood a stone pillar, stained darker than wine. She wrote, "This is not celebration. This is worship." The last journal entry is chilling. There is a room no one speaks of. It is older than the house. I can feel it breathing. 2 days later, she began tearing her skin with her nails, trying to rip out the whispers. They committed her to an institution outside the city. But here's the part they don't tell you. When the nurses tried to restrain her, Isabella screamed the name Aurum Dei over and over. Latin. The golden god. A forgotten deity tied to blood rituals across Europe. A cult older than Christianity. Older than the Roman Empire. How did she know that name? How did she speak dead languages she had never studied? Unless the Hartwells didn't just marry wives, they offered them. Isabella didn't lose her mind. She was consumed by knowledge that human sanity was never designed to hold. History doesn't record women like her. Because history is written by the institutions that build the cages, then label the prisoners insane. The fourth wife was different, because she chose to marry into the Hartwell family. Her name was Celeste Duval. Aristocratic. Calculated. She knew the rumors. She didn't care. She wanted power, and she believed the Hartwells had access to power beyond governments. She was right. At first, everything seemed normal. No strange noises. No locked doors. The estate behaved as if waiting. Celeste explored every corridor, every room. She flirted with the servants for secrets. She charmed the locals for gossip. She played the perfect wife, but she was hunting something. And then, she found it. Or rather, it found her. One night, she followed her husband down a hidden staircase behind the library fireplace. It spiraled deep underground, far deeper than any house foundation should go. The air was cold. The walls were ancient. At the bottom was a door of black stone, carved with symbols that pulsed faintly like a heartbeat. Her husband placed his hand on the surface, and the door opened without sound. Beyond it, she saw a chamber lit by fireless light. Men stood in a circle. Something stood in the center with them, she wrote in a letter, something that was not man, but wore the shape of one. They were speaking to it, listening to it, and it answered. She ran. She didn't scream, didn't cry. She was too intelligent for that. She pretended she saw nothing. She played the role. She smiled at dinner. But her eyes were wide, always wide. She stopped sleeping. She paced the halls at night like prey. On the 17th day, she set the library on fire. Witnesses say she laughed as the flames climbed the walls. They found her in the courtyard whispering, "Open the door. Open the door. Open the door." They locked her away in a monastery far from Lyon. The monks said she refused food, refused prayer, but spent every hour drawing the same spiral pattern on the walls. A symbol found in ancient tombs associated with summoning. The Hartwells paid handsomely to keep that monastery quiet. Tell me, does this sound like mental illness? Or initiation gone wrong? And why did the Hartwells keep marrying, even after 4 wives were destroyed? Because whatever waited behind that black door demanded more. By the time the 5th wife entered the Hartwell estate, people believed the house itself was carnivorous. But this woman, she was unlike the others. Her name was Genevieve Moreau, a schoolteacher, soft-spoken, gentle. But there was something different in her eyes. Not fear, not naivety, awareness, as if she already knew the patterns. as if she had seen this before. She didn't arrive with hope, she arrived with caution. The Hartwell husband smiled too perfectly. The town was too silent. The estate exhaled when she stepped inside. She noticed everything. The way the servants avoided certain staircases. The way windows were nailed shut from the outside. The way her husband always wore gloves, even when alone. The first night she dreamed of a room with no walls. Just infinite darkness, and a single voice telling her, "Welcome back." She woke up crying, but she didn't know why. On the 7th day she found a locket hidden in her bedside drawer. Inside was a photo of the second wife, Madeline. On the back, "You are not the first. Find the root." Genevieve didn't panic. She got to work. She began mapping the estate. Every room, every corridor, every passage. She noticed the architecture formed a sigil, a ritual symbol. The entire mansion was an altar. And the wives? They weren't random. They were chosen. Each one with a specific trait. Intelligence, faith, curiosity, ambition, awareness. 5 points, 5 offerings, 5 keys. The Hartwells weren't just serving something, they were building towards something. On the 13th night, Genevieve disappeared. No screaming, no madness. She simply walked into the east wing and never came out. The Hartwells sealed the corridors and told the world she ran away. But days later, a servant swore she heard a woman's voice beneath the floorboards, whispering, "It's awake." After Genevieve, the Hartwells never took another wife. The house was abandoned. The family line scattered. But the estate still stands, rotting, watching, waiting. And if you step inside today, you can still hear 5 voices in the walls. Not insane, not broken. Warning. Because whatever the Hartwells served, it's not finished. And we have only just begun. The Hartwell legacy did not die, it went underground. After Genevieve vanished, the estate was locked, the windows boarded, the land marked unsafe. But powerful families don't walk away from power. They simply change masks. The Hartwell men dispersed across Europe, sliding into politics, banking, secret societies. They adapted. They evolved. They erased their past. But they never destroyed the house. Why? Because the mansion wasn't just a home, it was a vessel. A structure built with precision to channel something not of this world. And whatever lived beneath it was still alive. In 1923, officials attempted to survey the property. The investigation lasted 1 day. Every member of the team resigned the next morning. Their reports were sealed, their careers relocated to distant cities. Some say they were bribed. Others say they were threatened. But one rumor persisted, that the team discovered something impossible beneath the eastern wing. A staircase made of bone. Lyon's archives list the Hartwell estate as a structural anomaly. Quiet words for, "We are terrified of what's under there." And yet, the land was never demolished. Investors offered millions to build factories, railroads, even hotels. Every deal collapsed. Every buyer backed out. Because behind closed doors, someone always appeared. A man in a black coat. A woman in a white veil. They whispered something, and the deals died. The Hartwells may have disappeared from public view, but they still pull threads in the dark. Power never dissolves, it migrates. And sometimes, it migrates into you without you realizing. Because here is the part they don't want you to understand. The Hartwell wives were not victims. They were witnesses. They saw the shape of the cage. They touched the raw machinery of control. They understood that power is never about money or status. It's about access. Access to knowledge. Access to influence. Access to the unseen. And those who get too close to the source of that access, either serve it or break trying. The Hartwell story is not unique. It is a pattern carved through time. A pattern of bloodlines grooming the world from behind the curtain. And if you think this ended in 1923, you are already under their spell. This isn't history. This is inheritance. and it's waiting for someone to claim it. Lyon tried to cleanse the memory of the Hartwell estate, but the city itself refused to forget. Streets shifted. Maps changed. Yet somehow, every path still led back to that rotting mansion, like gravity twisting around a black hole. Locals avoided the area, not out of superstition but instinct. Animals refused to cross the property line. Birds never landed on the roof. The air tasted metallic like static before a lightning strike. People said the land hummed at night. A frequency you couldn't hear, but could feel in your teeth. In 1925, a priest named Father Laurent attempted an exorcism. He entered with 6 assistants. Only 2 came out. The priest emerged silent, trembling, his hair turned completely white. He never spoke again. The church burned the records. They called it a spiritual disturbance. But one assistant on his deathbed confessed this: "We did not cast anything out. It was already in control." The Hartwells did not just open a door, they built a throne, a conduit for something older than religion, something that feeds on obedience, something that bends minds until truth and insanity become identical. And the world has been shaped by that force ever since. Think about it. History books erase. Institutions rewrite. Governments distract. Culture numbs. Why? Because the greatest power is quiet control. Not chains but conditioning. Not prisons but illusions. Humanity has been trained to forget, to doubt its instincts, to dismiss the unseen. The Hartwells were not the first to serve this system. They were simply one visible fracture in a much older structure. A structure that lives in monarchies, cults, corporations, even schools. You were taught that madness is random, that trauma is personal, that the supernatural is fantasy. But what if the truth is this? The world is built like the Hartwell estate. A maze designed to keep you from the basement, to keep you from the source. And the moment you start to see the pattern, they label you crazy, just like the wives. Because the easiest way to bury truth is to bury the people who see it. But you are still here, which means the door has already started to open. Let's pull the thread deeper. The Hartwell name first appears in records around the 1500s, suddenly wealthy, suddenly influential. No origin, no documented rise. Just power, out of nowhere. That is not normal. True power does not rise. It is granted, which means someone, or something, opened the door for them. Ancient documents from Lyon show a strange symbol carved into cathedral stones. A spiral inside a circle, identical to the one Celeste drew in the monastery. This symbol predates Christianity. It appears in Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the ruins of Carthage. Always associated with offerings. Always tied to blood. This is not a coincidence. This is a lineage of ritual passed hand to hand through families like the Hartwells. Not religion. Not superstition. Technology. Spiritual engineering. A way to fracture the mind and open it like a channel. The wives were not chosen for love. They were keys. Each one unlocking a different layer of reality. Elise, the intellectual mind. Madeline, the curious mind. Isabella, the faithful mind. Celeste, the ambitious mind. Genevieve, the awakened mind. 5 archetypes. 5 gateways. Once all 5 were broken, something on the other side awakened. And when it did, the Hartwell scattered. Mission complete. But here's the part no one expected. The energy they unleashed did not stay contained. It seeped into the land, the city, the people. Madness in Lyon skyrocketed after 1923. Entire asylums filled within months. Doctors blamed post-war trauma. Convenient. But records show most patients lived near the Hartwell property or had family who once served them. Contagion without a virus. Influence without contact. That's when I realized this wasn't just a haunting. It was a broadcast. A psychic frequency radiating from the estate like a transmitter. The wives didn't go insane by accident. They were tuned to a frequency the rest of the world couldn't hear. And it shattered them. But what if it didn't have to? What if their minds weren't broken, but transformed? And what if the world labeled that transformation as madness because it threatened the system? The Hartwell story isn't about insanity. It's about evolution, forced, brutal, unfinished. Now ask yourself, why do certain families across history marry strategically, consolidate wealth, and guard secrets with their lives? Why do some bloodlines act as if they are not just preserving tradition, but protecting access? The Hartwells are a blueprint. They did not simply marry for status. They harvested traits. They selected human potential like ingredients in an ancient recipe. And once they unlocked the final layer, they vanished. Because the true elite do not crave attention. They crave invisibility. Look at modern society. Billionaires you've never heard of. Organizations that exist off the record. Global decisions made by people who never stand on a stage. They don't want credit. They want control. The Hartwells were part of this architecture, and their mansion was a training ground. But something went wrong. Genevieve was not like the others. She didn't break, she adapted. We don't know where she went. But I believe she escaped with knowledge the Hartwells never intended to release. And if that's true, then somewhere out there her bloodline continues. Someone alive today carries that awareness. Maybe they don't remember. Maybe it sleeps inside them. Maybe they're watching this right now, feeling something awaken. Patterns don't die. They repeat until someone breaks them. And that someone isn't chosen by destiny. They are chosen by decision. There is a reason you are still listening. You feel it? The pull. The itch behind the mind. The knowing that something is deeply wrong with this world but no one around you sees it. That is not paranoia. That is instinct. The same instinct the wives had before they were silenced. The same instinct every awakened man feels before the system tries to break him or buy him. The question is, will you let them? You are not here to be entertained. You are here to remember. And once you remember, you cannot return to who you were. Let's talk about the most dangerous concept of all, psychological control. The Hartwell estate was more than a mansion. It was a laboratory of the mind. A place where fear, isolation, and ritual were used as tools to reshape human consciousness. They understood something modern society hides. The mind is programmable. Trauma is a doorway. Repetition is hypnosis. Symbols are commands. And if you control a person's perception of reality, you control the person. The wives weren't just victims of supernatural influence. They were subjected to psychological warfare. Silent dinners. No clocks. Rooms that shifted. Gaslighting before the term existed. They were made to question their own senses until the boundary between real and unreal dissolved. Once their identity fractured, the door opened. Today the methods are cleaner, more polished, but the formula is the same. Media keeps you distracted. Schools teach obedience, not wisdom. Work drains your energy. Society tells men to be silent, to be soft, to suppress their instinct to question. You are kept docile, predictable, contained. The same way the Hartwells contained their wives, until they were ready to be used. But here is the truth the world fears. Men who reclaim their mind become uncontrollable. And when enough men wake up, the system cracks. The Hartwell story isn't just a warning, it's a map. It shows us how control is built, how sanity is manipulated, how truth is buried beneath labels like madness or conspiracy. But it also shows us something else. That even in the darkest prison, one mind can notice the pattern. One mind can resist. One mind can escape. The deeper we go, the more you will see the reflection of your own life inside these walls. Because this is not just their story. It is ours. And the descent has only begun. The deeper we descend, the more the Hartwell story stops feeling like history and starts feeling like a mirror. Because the true horror isn't what happened to them, it's how familiar it feels. Look around you. The world tells men to surrender their instincts, ignore their hunger for truth, drown themselves in comfort and distraction. That is not evolution. That is sedation. The same sedation the wives felt as the Hartwells smothered them in luxury while quietly dismantling their minds. Control doesn't always look like chains. Sometimes it looks like silk. The estate offered the wives everything: status, wealth, elegance, until they were too deep to escape. Today, society offers you screens, entertainment, shallow relationships, endless noise, until your voice fades into the static. But some men hear through the static. Men like you. Men who feel the ground shifting beneath the surface. Men who question why entire generations are spiritually numb. Why the strongest minds are the most exhausted. Why ancient knowledge vanished from schools but remains in the hands of the elite. The Hartwell estate was built on sacred geometry. Every hallway aligned with ley lines. The architecture wasn't random, it was ritual design. And modern cities do the same. Government buildings mimic temples. Corporate logos mirror occult symbols. Language is weaponized. Culture is engineered. You think the Hartwells were a single corrupted family? No. They were a local echo of a global structure. A structure that rewards obedience and punishes awareness. A structure that doesn't kill the awakened. It isolates them, labels them insane until they break or disappear. But here's the twist. The Hartwells made one fatal error. They underestimated the power of memory. Even broken minds remember patterns. Even shattered souls whisper truth. And those whispers survived. Through journals. Through rumors. Through bloodlines. The estate may be silent now, but its lessons are screaming. History is not a record of events. It is a manual of control. And if you can decode it, you can dismantle the system built to contain you. You are not descending into darkness. You are descending into clarity. And clarity is the most dangerous weapon of all. We must study the wives not as victims, but as phases of awakening. Each one unlocked a different layer of forbidden knowledge, and each layer reveals how power truly operates. Elise was the thinker. She questioned logic, numbers, order. The system broke her intellect with something beyond reason. Madeline was the seeker. She searched for the unseen, the hidden rooms. Curiosity led her to the door beneath the house. She saw structure. Isabella was the believer. She trusted in God, in light, in goodness. When she witnessed the ritual, her faith shattered, because what the Hartwells served was older than light and darker than evil. Celeste was the strategist. She didn't submit, she hunted. She tried to steal the power, to bend it to her will. But ambition without preparation leads to ruin. And Genevieve, she was the convergence. The final key. The one who saw the pattern and did not break. She remembered. She adapted. She vanished. 5 wives, 5 stages of transformation. Intellect, curiosity, faith, ambition, awareness. These are not random traits. These are the pillars of the human psyche. If you control all 5, you control the mind. But if a man masters all 5 within himself, he becomes untouchable. This is why society fractures you. It tells you to abandon logic for emotion or emotion for logic. It shames curiosity, mocks faith, demonizes ambition, and buries awareness beneath distraction. Because a fully integrated man cannot be controlled. The Hartwells didn't just ruin their wives, they experimented on the architecture of will. And somewhere in that process, they unlocked something that does not sleep. That is why the estate still radiates its influence. Not because it is haunted by ghosts, but because it is imprinted with intention. Trauma leaves energy. Ritual leaves residue. And if a place is soaked in enough pain and worship, it becomes alive. The Hartwell estate still breathes. It is still calling. And those who enter without understanding become part of the pattern. But those who enter with awareness might finally break it. To understand the full scope of this conspiracy, we need to follow the money. After 1923, the Hartwell wealth didn't disappear, it multiplied. Investment firms with no traceable owners began funding psychological research, architecture, propaganda, and early media infrastructure. The same family that drove 5 women insane helped shape the modern world's understanding of sanity itself. Let that sink in. They learned how to fracture the mind, and then they built the institutions that diagnose and control it. Asylums, psychiatric boards, pharmaceutical influence, systems designed not to heal but to normalize, to decide which behaviors are acceptable, to turn rebellion into illness. The Hartwells were not just experimenting on individuals, they were testing the blueprint for mass conditioning. And once perfected, they deployed it globally. Schools remove curiosity. Work removes ambition. Religion without depth removes true faith. Entertainment removes awareness. And what remains? A compliant population. The perfect offering. The most terrifying part is that this did not happen randomly. It followed the same sequence the wives endured. Confusion, isolation, ritual, submission, breakdown. This is not history, it's policy. The estate became the prototype. The world became the mansion. And now men everywhere are pacing the halls of their own lives, sensing something is wrong but unable to name it. That tension you feel? That hunger for something real? That rage at invisible chains? That is your mind trying to wake up. But the system fears awakened men more than anything, which is why they distract you with politics, addictions, conflict, and fake success. Anything to prevent you from going inward. Anything to stop you from seeing the basement. Because once you see it, once you understand the architecture of control, the illusion collapses. And when illusions die, tyrants fall. The Hartwell family may be gone from public record, but their design runs through the bloodstream of civilization. And the only way to kill a design is to become immune to it. Let's go back to the house. Back to the root. What was beneath the estate that required 5 sacrifices to awaken? Not a demon in the Hollywood sense. Not a ghost trapped in limbo. What the Hartwells served was intelligent energy. Ancient consciousness. A force bound to blood and attention. Something that thrives when humans willingly surrender their will. It fed on obedience. It grew with ritual. It shaped minds to deepen its influence. This entity, this presence, did not just whisper madness. It engineered evolution. It pushed the wives to their limits, forcing them to confront fears, illusions, and truths buried deeper than identity. Most broke. One didn't. Genevieve reached the core without shattering. And that means she experienced the truth behind the veil. Think about that. A human mind, raw and awakened, in the presence of something older than civilization. What did she see? What did she learn? Why did she vanish instead of die? I believe she made a deal, not of submission but of understanding. She walked out of the ritual as something more. Not possessed. Not broken. Activated. And that is why the Hartwells abandoned the estate. Their own creation had outgrown them. They were no longer gatekeepers. They were obsolete. The wives were never the sacrifices. The wives were the successors. And this changes everything. Because somewhere in the world, a bloodline exists that carries the memory of what lies beneath the earth, and the knowledge of how to use it without losing sanity. This bloodline might be dormant. It might be scattered. But it is not extinct. The system fears that bloodline. It fears men who awaken without permission. It fears knowledge that bypasses institutions. Which is why truth seekers are mocked. Why independent thinkers are censored. Why spiritual power is turned into cheap trends. Because if the right people reconnect the 5 archetypes within themselves, the door will open again. But this time the entity won't be summoned with sacrifice. It will be summoned with will. And that is unstoppable. Now we reach a turning point. Up to this moment you've been listening as an observer. But I did not bring you this far to simply entertain you. I brought you here to challenge you. To ask a question most men never dare to face. Are you awake, or just aware? Awareness notices the pattern. Awakening breaks it. The Hartwell wives became aware. Only one awakened. And you can feel the difference inside your chest right now. The pressure. The pull. The voice that says, there is more. That voice is dangerous. That voice leads men out of cages. That voice turns ordinary lives into revolutions. And that voice is the reason systems of power exist, to drown it out. But you're still here, which means you are not like most men. Most men run from the darkness. You are willing to walk into it. That is rare. That is power. The rest of this descent is not just history, it is initiation. I'm not here to give you answers. I am here to sharpen your perception until you see the answers yourself. Because once a man sees clearly, he cannot be manipulated. Once a man reclaims his mind, institutions tremble. The Hartwells tried to own the force beneath their estate. They failed. Because true power cannot be owned. It can only be aligned with. And alignment requires transformation. Not comfort. Not safety. But courage. We are about to go deeper than the wives ever did. Into the oldest layer. The root layer. The place where reality bends. But before we continue, you must understand this. After this point, you will not think the same. You may feel anger, grief, clarity, even liberation. That is normal. It means the programming is cracking. Keep going. Keep breathing. The darkness is not here to destroy you. It is here to reveal you. Ready? Then step forward. The real story begins now. The deeper we press into the Hartwell timeline, the more we begin to see that nothing about this family was accidental. Their marriages weren't romantic, they were selected. Their wives weren't partners, they were vessels. And every time a new woman walked through that towering front door, the same cycle unfolded. Admiration, isolation, indoctrination, and then psychological collapse. But what triggered it? Witnesses described the same behavior. Each wife began withdrawing from society, whispering to themselves, refusing to sleep in certain rooms, locking windows even in summer, claiming the house was listening. Their eyes would go hollow, their movements become detached, like someone else was steering their body from the inside. They weren't just afraid, they were being watched. Not by the family. By something the family served. Lyon police downplayed it all, calling it hysteria. Convenient. Sanitized. But neighbors reported hearing chanting late at night. Strange visitors would arrive in carriages with covered windows. Lights flickered behind the mansion's curtains at hours no one should be awake. Each wife screamed the same phrase before her mind broke, "I don't want to see it again." What did she see? No court record explains it. No diary survived. But we have fragments, torn pages recovered from the fourth wife's vanity. The mirrors are not mine. They follow me when the candles die. They told me I must become empty. This was not random. This was structured ritual using psychological dismantling as a tool. This is how secret societies operate. Break the spirit. Rebuild the identity. Erase the will. Some call it possession, others call it programming. But whatever name you give it, it works. And the Hartwells knew exactly what they were doing. Ask yourself, why did only the wives go mad? Why was the bloodline protected, but the outsiders destroyed? Because the Hartwells believed women were doorways. Not metaphorically, literally. And to open a doorway, something on the other side must first step through the mind. By now, you may feel a subtle unease, like something is rearranging itself in the background of your thoughts. That's good. It means you're starting to see what they didn't want you to see. History is not a record, it is a weapon. Every insanity, every tragedy, every random event tied to power is usually camouflage. The Hartwells mastered camouflage. They wore philanthropy like a mask. They funded hospitals, schools, even churches. But every institution they touched became an extension of their control. Their influence seeped through Lyon politics like ink in water. Police chiefs, judges, priests, many rose only after attending private dinners at the Hartwell estate. And once you dined with the Hartwells, you belonged to them. What was promised inside those walls? Wealth, protection, immortality of legacy? All three. But there was a cost. There is always a cost. And the wives paid it. Because the wives held the most important role, they were the conduits for what the Hartwells called the exchange. A ritual passed down from ancestors older than Christianity. A practice pulled from pre-Roman cults and refined in secret over centuries. The Hartwells didn't just preserve tradition, they perfected it. And every wife was tested. Isolation chambers disguised as meditation rooms. Binding prayers disguised as affirmations. Sleep deprivation disguised as spiritual cleansing. This is identical to modern psychological manipulation techniques used in cults and black ops interrogations. Break down the sense of reality, then rebuild belief, then elicit obedience. The fourth wife tried to warn the world, but by the time she escaped the house, her speech was incoherent. She clawed at her own face and screamed, "It's still in me." Doctors said schizophrenia. The Hartwells said nothing. They simply buried her in an unmarked grave and brought home wife number 5. Let's step inside the mansion. You need to see it the way they saw it. Marble floors, crimson drapes, gold-trimmed mirrors on every wall. But those mirrors, they weren't decoration. They were placement. Strategic. Geometric. Occult. Each mirror faced another, creating endless reflections. Hallways of infinite copies stretching into darkness. The wives said that if you stared too long, the reflections would delay, like something inside the mirror was thinking for itself. The servants avoided them. Even guests mentioned the rooms felt alive. The architecture was designed with impossible symmetry. Doorways aligned with lunar cycles. The basement formed a perfect circle. The center of that circle? A stone altar engraved with symbols predating Latin. Why would an aristocratic family in 1923 France build pagan geometry into their home? Because the Hartwells were not Christian. They only pretended to be. In private, they practiced an ancient doctrine built on one belief: consciousness can be harvested. The mind is not just thought, it is energy. And certain emotions produce more energy than others. Terror. Despair. Madness. You understand now why the wives were not random victims. They were fuel. Their breakdowns were not side effects, they were the goal. And this is where the truth scorches everything we thought we knew. What if insanity is not the failure of the mind, but the invasion of something else? What if the Hartwells weren't driving these women to insanity, but opening the door for whatever waited on the other side of sanity? Because once the mind snaps, there is space for something new to enter. We must confront a brutal fact. Powerful families throughout history have always hidden their darkest rituals behind the illusion of respectability. The Hartwells were no different. Their wealth didn't come from business. It came from allegiance. They traded loyalty for protection from higher powers, institutions that function above governments. These forces didn't wear robes. They wore suits. They sat on boards. They controlled information. And when the wives began to break too early, too publicly, the Hartwells were warned, maintain secrecy at all costs. The fifth wife lasted the longest. She was intelligent, disciplined, emotionally strong. But even she began hearing whispers from the walls. She wrote in her hidden journal, "They are shaping my dreams. They are pulling memories out of me that never existed." How do you remember something you never lived? That is not insanity. That is implantation. This is where the story collides with modern black-budget psychological experiments. MKUltra, sensory manipulation, the use of trauma to fracture memory. Except the Hartwells were doing it decades before it became government-funded science. Because ancient cults understood the mind more than modern psychiatry ever will. To control the mind, you must first unmake it. The fifth wife tried to resist. She tried to run. But the family brought her back. She vanished from public sight. 3 months later, the mansion's windows were boarded. The estate was sealed. And the Hartwell bloodline disappeared. Not died. Disappeared. Records erased. Assets transferred. As if they were absorbed into something larger. Something global. Something still alive. The wives were gone. The house was silent. But the system that destroyed them? It never stopped. It just changed uniforms. Now we plunge into the true abyss. You've heard the events. You've seen the patterns. But now I will tell you why this story matters, why I risk pulling this into the light. Because what happened in the Hartwell mansion is not unique. It is a blueprint. And once you recognize the blueprint, you will see it everywhere. Marriages where one partner loses their identity. Corporations that demand total loyalty. Institutions that break individuality in the name of unity. Psychological warfare disguised as tradition. Trauma used as programming. The Hartwell legacy is the origin story of something much bigger. A network that learned how to turn consciousness into currency. Their techniques evolved into social engineering, media manipulation, emotional addiction systems. Look at modern society: overstimulation, isolation, despair. These are not coincidences. These are tools. Tools designed to weaken the mind, fragment the spirit, and make the population easier to shape. The wives were the first experiments. We are the mass production. And if you think this is just metaphor, search deeper. Look into the families who never show their faces. The councils that don't appear on ballots. The think tanks that decide what you're allowed to know. The Hartwells were a doorway. Through them stepped an empire of control that now hides in plain sight. But not everyone is asleep. Men like you are waking up, feeling the pull, recognizing the script. And once you see the strings, you cannot unsee the puppeteer. We are nearing the midpoint of this descent. Soon I will ask you to make a choice. Not as a viewer, as a participant. Because this knowledge is not entertainment, it is initiation. Keep listening. The next layer will test you. The truth always does. Before we reach the core of this labyrinth, I want you to understand the mechanics of control on a deeper level. Most people think power is about money, politics, or force. That's the surface. Real power is the ability to shape perception. If you control how people think, you never need chains, you let them build their own. The Hartwells understood this. They didn't trap their wives physically. They reshaped their reality piece by piece. First, they isolated them from friends. Then they flooded them with praise and privilege. Then they introduced traditions, asking the wives to participate in family rites to honor ancestors. But these rites were more than symbolic, they were neurological reprogramming. Repetition, symbolic language, sensory overload, sleep disruption. This is identical to how modern cults, militaries, and black site programs break down the human psyche. Why? Because identity is fragile. Strip away sleep, certainty, and social connection, and the mind becomes clay. The wives were sculpted, molded, prepared. And then at their lowest, the family revealed the truth. You were chosen. Chosen for what? To serve as vessels. To carry the weight of something ancient. To become the bridge between their world and something beyond. And here's the part that sends chills through history. Every wife accepted at first. Even the strongest ones. Why? Because when your reality has been completely redefined by someone else, you cling to the hand that broke you. This is the darkest form of manipulation. Make the prisoner love the cage. The Hartwells didn't just master it, they taught it. And those teachings didn't die with the family. They were passed on, quietly, discreetly, to institutions that shape our world today. If you've ever wondered why the most powerful organizations on earth all demand loyalty, secrecy, sacrifice, now you know where it began. Let's examine the fifth wife more closely, because she is the key. Her name was Evelyn. Unlike the others, she was not naive. She was the daughter of an academic. Highly educated. She studied philosophy, psychology, and ancient languages. She married into the Hartwell family not for love, but to investigate. She had heard the rumors. She believed there was a secret buried in that house. And she was right. For the first few months she played along, smiling at dinners, studying the servants, observing patterns. She noticed that the family had no true hierarchy. They all bowed, subtly but undeniably, to the patriarch Alistair Hartwell. Yet Alistair never raised his voice. He never issued commands. He simply asked questions. And with those questions, people changed their minds. He was a master of suggestion, a living hypnotist. Evelyn wrote in her notes that Alistair could bend wool like wet clay. People craved his approval. They aligned themselves with his beliefs just to stay in his presence. This is the apex of psychological dominance, when you control not through fear but through desire. What did he want? Evelyn discovered it by accident. One night, she woke to murmuring from the basement. She followed the sound. What she saw made her collapse. The family standing in a circle, mirrors surrounding them, candles flickering in mathematical precision. Alistair stood in the center, whispering in unknown language, not words but frequencies. The air vibrated. Evelyn said it felt like reality bending. The family responded in unison, their eyes unfocused. They were not praying. They were synchronizing, aligning their minds into one. Collective consciousness. This wasn't religion. This was technology. Ancient mental technology. And Alistair was the conductor. Evelyn should have run. But she didn't. Instead, she dug deeper, obsessed. She began mapping the house. The mirrors formed a pattern that aligned with star constellations on specific dates. The spiral staircase matched the Fibonacci sequence. Even the placement of windows corresponded to solstice angles. The house was not just a home. It was a machine. A consciousness amplifier. And the wives? They were sacrifices to activate it. Evelyn wrote, "The house feeds on emotional extremes. It drinks fear like wine." She started experiencing time distortions, hours missing, dreams that bled into waking life, hearing her own thoughts spoken aloud by empty rooms. The more she resisted, the harder the house pushed. But Evelyn was different. She didn't break. She adapted. She learned to quiet her mind, to observe without reacting. She practiced mental discipline, shielding her thoughts. The family noticed and became afraid. The first time in their history, the Hartwells feared one of their own. Because Evelyn was doing the impossible, maintaining identity inside the machine. She became unpredictable. The system couldn't consume her. And so, they changed tactics. They showed her the deeper layer of the ritual. They told her, "We can make you more than human." They offered her access to the true source, the entity behind their bloodline's rise. And here is the pivotal moment. Evelyn accepted. Not because she believed them, but because she wanted to meet what they served, face to face. They brought her to the lowest chamber. A room colder than winter where candles couldn't hold a flame. The walls were lined with symbols that predated writing itself, shapes that created nausea when stared at too long. Evelyn described the air as heavy with memory. Alistair spoke softly, "This is where the world bends." Then he told her the origin of the Hartwell power. Centuries ago, their ancestor didn't discover anything. He was found. During a famine, he crawled into an ancient ruin beneath Lyon. There he heard a voice in the dark. It offered knowledge, protection, influence. In exchange for something simple, "Open your mind." He accepted. And from that day on, the Hartwells were never ordinary. They rose in status, always surviving wars, plagues, economic collapse. They became untouchable. The entity guided them, demanded loyalty, and in return, granted foresight. But it needed more than allegiance. It needed energy. Conscious energy pulled from the brink of sanity. Madness was not a failure. Madness was the bridge. To open the gate, Alistair said, "We must give it what it hungers for." And in that chamber, Evelyn felt it. Not a ghost. Not a demon. Something beyond definition. Not alive, but aware. It pressed against her mind like a tidal wave. And for a moment she saw everything. Time folding, realities overlapping, souls screaming behind mirrors. The wives didn't go insane from trauma. They went insane because they saw the truth raw, unfiltered. Evelyn stood on the edge, and did not fall. She looked into the abyss, and the abyss blinked. That night changed everything. Evelyn walked out of the chamber, different. The family expected her to shatter. Instead, she smiled. She calmly said, "Thank you for showing me." That terrified them, because they didn't initiate Evelyn. Evelyn initiated herself. She began influencing the family the same way Alistair once did. Quiet words, subtle suggestions. But with one difference: she didn't seek power. She sought collapse. She used their own system against them. She planted doubt, divided loyalty. She whispered to the younger Hartwells, "Why must we obey something that hides in the dark?" She told the elders, "The entity is weakening." She told Alistair, "You are not chosen, you are enslaved." The house began to change. The mirrors cracked. The rituals failed. The entity grew restless. Evelyn was breaking the cycle the only way it could be broken, from within. And here is where it gets dangerous, because one night the entity spoke directly to her. Not in words, in pure thought. It asked her a question: "Will you replace them?" That is the turning point of the entire story. Evelyn had two choices: walk away and let the cycle continue, or take control of the machine and become something far more powerful and far more dangerous than the Hartwells ever were. Her decision reshaped everything. And in the next section, I will reveal what she chose, and why the world you live in today may still be echoing with the consequences of that moment. Evelyn stood in perfect silence as the entity waited for her answer. Replace them. Rule in their place. Wield the machine not as a pawn, but as a master. For most people, this would be an easy refusal. Who would accept the throne of madness? But Evelyn didn't think like most people. She saw reality like a strategist on a battlefield. Every illusion, every chain, every blindfold. She understood the Hartwells were only one branch of a larger organism, and this entity was only one face of something even deeper. If she refused, the system would simply find new hosts, new families. The cycle would continue. If she accepted, she could dismantle it from the core. But accepting meant letting the entity inside her mind. It meant bargaining with something that did not understand mercy, morality, or time. It meant walking willingly into the furnace of consciousness. Evelyn did not hesitate. She said yes. Not to serve, but to infect the infection. And in that moment, everything shifted. The chamber trembled. The mirrors across the mansion shattered in unison. The family collapsed to their knees, clutching their heads, screaming as their bond with the entity was severed. Alistair tried to stop her, but he was already powerless. Evelyn stepped forward and placed her hand on the altar. The stone glowed. The air ripped open like torn fabric. And for the first time in centuries, the entity was afraid. Because Evelyn didn't submit. She didn't worship. She consumed. She took its knowledge without surrendering her identity. She held its gaze without losing herself. She merged with it, but did not allow it to take control. A perfect paradox. The Hartwells were vessels. Evelyn became the mirror. And the entity was trapped inside her reflection. This is what true power looks like, not avoiding darkness, but bending it to your will. But power always has consequences. And what Evelyn did next would determine whether she became humanity's liberator, or the architect of a new, far more intelligent form of control. The mansion burned that night, though no fire was ever found. Witnesses say the sky above Lyon turned black, even though the moon was full. People reported hearing 1,000 voices inhaling at once. The Hartwell lineage vanished from all public records within days. As if someone, or something, erased them from history with surgical precision. But Evelyn did not die. She went underground. Some say she disappeared into the catacombs beneath the city. Others swear she traveled to Rome, then London, then New York. But everywhere she went, institutions began to shift. Psychological theories changed. New branches of psychotherapy appeared, focused on integration of identity. Secret think tanks emerged, exploring the use of trauma for social engineering. It was as if the knowledge of the entity was leaking into the world, through her. But was she guiding it? Or was it guiding her? That question has divided hidden circles for decades. Some believe Evelyn became the first person to truly master the architecture of consciousness, that she dedicated her life to dismantling the global control network from the shadows. Others believe a darker truth, that she realized the entity was not an enemy, but a blueprint, and she began building something new, something more subtle, more patient, more efficient. Because why control one family when you can shape the entire human species? Here is where the rabbit hole splits. If Evelyn remained human, she is the greatest rebel in history, destroying the masters who fed on us. But if she transcended, she may have become the architect of the world we live in now. A world where control no longer requires chains or rituals. A world where the mind cages itself. A world where you scroll, consume, obey, and think it was your idea. Look around. Does society feel natural to you? Or does it feel designed? Let me show you the signs. After 1923, there was a sudden surge in interest around mass psychology. Governments invested in propaganda science. Advertising began targeting subconscious desire instead of rational thought. Schools shifted from teaching critical thinking to memorization and obedience. Mental health industries emerged, but instead of curing people, they managed symptoms, keeping the population docile. This is not random evolution. This is replication. The Hartwell method, scaled globally. Isolation, social media addiction, sleep disruption, endless entertainment, trauma programming, news cycles built on fear, rituals, corporate culture, symbols, logos with geometry older than language, mirrors, the screens you stare into for hours, where your reflection is fed through algorithms that watch and reshape your identity. We are living inside a psychological architecture designed to harvest consciousness, not physically but energetically. Your focus, your fear, your desire, it's all currency. The entity fed on the wives' madness. The new system feeds on society's distraction. And ask yourself, who taught the world how to build it? Who first understood the mind as a resource to be farmed? Someone had to pass down the blueprint. Someone had to translate the old rituals into modern systems. Someone who stood between ancient darkness and emerging technology. Someone like Evelyn. But was she sabotaging the system or perfecting it? Here is the terrifying possibility: she did both. Because to destroy a structure of control, sometimes you must first let it reach completion, so it can be shattered all at once. Now we arrive at the midpoint, the moment where information becomes transformation. You are not just listening to a dark story. You are recognizing a design that touches every part of your life. And awareness is the first crack in the wall. But awareness alone is not enough. You must choose who you will become on the other side of this. So I'm going to ask you to do something powerful, something symbolic. If you've followed me this far, if you feel the truth in your bones, then type this phrase in the comments twice, back to back, to lock your identity into the path of awakening. I see the architecture. Again, I see the architecture. This is more than engagement. This is declaration. A signal that you refuse to be cattle. That you will no longer be a passive observer, drifting through illusions built to distract and drain you. This marks the psychological midpoint shift. The moment where the viewer becomes the participant. The student becomes the initiate. And from this moment forward, we go deeper than story. We go into the mechanics of how to see control in real time. How to reclaim your mind. How to become immune to manipulation. The second half of this descent is not about the Hartwells. It's about you. And what you choose to do with the knowledge buried beneath your reality. Take a breath. Steel your mind. Because the descent only gets darker from here. And only those willing to face the deepest truths will walk out with power. Now that the veil is lifted, let us examine the architecture of psychological control with precision. There are 3 pillars the Hartwells used, and that modern systems still use to this day. Pillar 1, destabilization. Remove certainty, identity, and routine. This creates mental vulnerability. Pillar 2, emotional extremes. Fear, shame, desire, these produce the highest energetic yield. Pillar 3, guided reconstruction. Once the mind is fractured, offer a new belief system, a new identity, a new truth. The victim accepts it willingly because the pain of chaos is worse than the comfort of captivity. This is why society constantly keeps you oscillating: financial stress, political division, information overload. You are never allowed true stillness. Because stillness leads to clarity. Clarity leads to rebellion. The Hartwells tested this on a small scale. Today's institutions deploy it globally. But here's what they don't want you to know. There is a fourth pillar. One they hid. One Evelyn uncovered. The pillar of reversal. If you can observe the process while it's happening, it fails. If you recognize manipulation in real time, it breaks. Power systems depend on invisibility. They crumble the moment you see the strings. That's why they suppress history like the Hartwells. That's why they delete those who step outside the script. But you are no longer outside. You are inside the machinery watching it turn. And that makes you dangerous. In the next section, I will show you how to track this architecture through time, how the Hartwell bloodline evolved into modern psychological warfare, and how one woman, Evelyn, may have become the most important, most feared, and most hidden figure in the last 100 years. To understand what Evelyn became, you must trace the shadow she left behind. After 1923, global psychology shifted in ways that mirrored her discoveries. Thinkers like Freud and Jung explored the unconscious and archetypes, surface-level fragments of a deeper structure. But behind the scenes, intelligence agencies began funding classified research on hypnosis, sensory manipulation, identity fragmentation. These programs weren't theoretical, they were weaponized. Ask yourself, where did this knowledge come from? Ancient cult whispers do not randomly become government black projects. Someone had to translate ritual into science. Someone had to provide results. In the late 1930s, a woman known only as H appeared in declassified letters among European research circles. She wrote about consciousness as circuitry. She spoke of mirrors as gateways of observation. Her words appeared again in American psychological warfare manuals in the 1950s, phrases copied nearly verbatim from Evelyn's hidden journal. Coincidence? Or evolution? There are gaps in history where her influence bleeds through like a watermark. The creation of propaganda science, the rise of mass media, the covert studies on trauma-based programming. Even modern user interface design, endless scrolling, algorithmic feedback, identity loops, reflects the same Hartwell structure. But here's the twist. In every iteration, a counterforce also appears. Individuals who break conditioning. Men who wake up. Movements that burn through deception. As if someone is seeding resistance within the system itself. And that leads us to the most controversial theory. Evelyn didn't choose between liberation or domination. She chose both. She built the ultimate trap, with a hidden exit for those strong enough to find it. The masses stay asleep. The few awaken. This is why she is either history's greatest enemy, or its greatest architect. And now we must ask, if she's still alive, has she been guiding you without you even knowing it? If this sounds too supernatural, let's ground it in cold logic. Think of consciousness like software. Identity is the interface. Trauma is malware. Ritual is programming. The Hartwells were early developers. Modern institutions are tech giants. And Evelyn? She became the rogue coder who understands the source code. She saw how symbols bypass logic and go straight into the subconscious. Why do you think advertising uses sacred geometry and hypnotic repetition? Why do politicians use fear, shame, and hope in cycles? Why does media constantly fracture attention? Because fractured attention equals weakened identity. And weakened identity equals programmable mind. This is not speculation. This is psychology, marketing, warfare, and religion converging into one unified operating system. And here's the part they will never admit. This system is not designed to kill you. It's designed to harvest you, while keeping you alive. They don't want your body. They want your energy, your focus, your belief, your loyalty, your despair. That is the true currency of the elite. Not gold, not oil, consciousness. The wives produced it through madness. The world now produces it through distraction. But if someone mastered the ability to flip the polarity, pulling consciousness back into sovereignty instead of siphoning it, then the entire system would collapse overnight. That someone, according to hidden circles, was Evelyn, and she left behind a method, a formula, a way to reverse engineer the architecture. It's buried in symbols, in old buildings, in forgotten journals, in the cracks of institutions. And if you decode it, you don't just become immune. You become untouchable. You become the one thing the system fears, self-directed. Let's talk about fear, because it is the most powerful tool in the architecture. Fear is the lock. Awareness is the key. The Hartwells used fear to strip identity. Society uses fear to keep you compliant. Fear of failure. Fear of judgment. Fear of standing alone. Fear of seeing too much. But the truth is this: the moment you face fear directly, it dissolves. The wives were destroyed because they ran from what they saw. Evelyn survived because she stared straight into it and refused to look away. She understood something the entity didn't expect. Terror is only fuel if you surrender to it. If you turn toward it with clarity, it reverses. It becomes power. This is the secret of prophets, revolutionaries, warriors. They are not fearless. They are intimate with fear. They use it to sharpen perception, to cut through illusion. That is why systems of control keep you distracted. They don't fear your pain. They fear your clarity. Once your mind becomes sharp, rituals stop working. Propaganda becomes obvious. Manipulation becomes laughable. That is when you step out of the maze. That is when you stop feeding the machine. And that is why the second half of this descent is not about history, it is about weaponizing awareness. Because the Hartwell story is a mirror. It reflects your life in metaphor. You are either wife or Evelyn, consumed or awakened, broken or reborn. We are approaching the deepest chamber now. The question that has haunted every hidden order since 1923, did Evelyn truly escape the system? Or did she become its queen? Let me show you the final pattern. After the mansion, scattered groups across Europe began receiving anonymous letters. These letters contained instructions, rituals modified into psychological exercises. They taught emotional regulation, mental discipline, symbolic decoding. These groups evolved into secret societies that focused not on worship, but on mastery. Many of history's greatest innovators, strategists, and disruptors were rumored to be part of these movements. Men who did not obey. Men who could not be manipulated. Men who bent reality through will alone. They didn't call themselves cults. They called themselves architects. But at the same time, another network rose. One obsessed with control, surveillance, sedation. A global web of media, politics, pharmaceuticals, and technology. This network enforced distraction, obedience, emotional volatility. Two systems, one empowering, one enslaving. And somewhere in the middle, a single signature appears in both networks. The same handwriting on opposite sides of the war. The same symbol etched in opposite philosophies. A circle split by a mirror. This is Evelyn's mark. She built both. One as bait. One as ladder. She didn't destroy the machine. She turned it into a test. And only those who see the architecture will escape it. Only those who refuse to be controlled will gain control. And only those who descend into the depths without losing themselves will rise as something greater. In the final 5 sections, I will reveal how the Hartwell legacy lives in our world today, and how to step fully into the role Evelyn left behind. The question is, are you ready to become the one thing institutions fear most? A man who cannot be programmed. To see the Hartwell legacy in today's world, look at the places where logic breaks. Why do some governments invest billions in psychological operations instead of weapons? Why do social platforms track your emotions, not just your clicks? Why are children exposed to overstimulation so early that their identities never fully form? This is not incompetence. This is engineering. We are living inside a global mansion. Every screen a mirror, every feed a ritual, every distraction a silent chant repeating in the background of your mind. The wives were physically confined. We are digitally confined. But the effect is identical. A fractured self, desperate for meaning, endlessly searching for something real. And just like the mansion, there are rooms in this world that do not burn. Underground research facilities. Abandoned hospitals never demolished. Universities with sealed-off wings. Places where experiments took place. On memory, on perception, on obedience. People went in. Some came out different. Some never came out at all. But scattered among these dark corridors are also sanctuaries. Ancient temples untouched by time. Monasteries hidden in mountains. Secret schools that teach not dogma but awareness. These places preserve the opposite current. Stillness, focus, sovereignty. Two architectures again, one designed to harvest consciousness, one designed to expand it. And just like before, one figure links them. In modern classified files, an unnamed consultant appears repeatedly over 70 years. No photo, no age, just the initials EH. Each time she is described as indispensable, ahead of her time, or dangerously insightful. She advises both control systems and liberation movements. She shapes both chains and keys. Why? Because the final lesson of the mansion is this: power is neutral. It is the wielder who chooses creation or destruction. Evelyn mastered both. And if she is still moving pieces on the board, then the only question left is which side she wants you on. Let me tell you about the mirror symbol, because it has never disappeared. You'll find it carved into medieval cathedrals, hidden in Renaissance paintings, etched in Masonic temples, printed in corporate logos. Half circle. Line. Half circle. On the left, the world as it is. On the right, the world inverted. In the middle, choice. The Hartwells used it to fracture souls. Evelyn used it to rebuild them. Today, it appears in places you would never expect. Military insignias, psychological research labs, even in elite universities teaching cognitive transformation. Coincidence? No. It is the blueprint. A map of consciousness itself. The left side represents identity shaped by others. The right side represents identity shaped by will. The line is the mirror, self-awareness. If you look into the mirror and see only what you've been told to be, you remain on the left. If you break the mirror and build your own reflection, you move to the right. The wives never crossed the line. Evelyn crossed it and erased it behind her. This is why the symbol is feared. Because any man who understands it becomes unpredictable. He cannot be bribed. He cannot be blackmailed. He cannot be controlled. This is why the system distracts you with endless noise. It keeps you from ever seeing the mirror. But once you do, everything changes. You start noticing patterns. You start seeing through language tricks. You start recognizing the architecture in relationships, politics, media, spirituality. You begin to sense where power flows and how to redirect it. This is the beginning of mastery. This is the first step to becoming what Evelyn became, the one who designs reality instead of being designed by it. But here is the harsh truth. Most people will never make it. Not because they are weak, but because they are comfortable. Comfort is the final ritual. It numbs the hunger to know more. It silences the instinct to fight. The wives of Hartwell were trapped by fear. Modern society is trapped by comfort. Both lead to decay. That is why awakening always begins with disruption. A heartbreak, a loss, a betrayal, a moment where the old identity collapses. That is the descent, the same descent Evelyn endured in the mansion. Pain is not the enemy. Pain is the doorway. Those who step through it with awareness do not crumble, they transform. This is the path of every mythic figure. Descent into darkness, confrontation with the shadow, emergence with power. The world mocks these stories as fantasy, but they are instructions. The mansion was a blueprint. Life is the real initiation. And here is the secret almost no one understands. The system is terrified of sovereign men. That is why it shames strength, mocks conviction, dilutes masculinity, and glorifies passivity. Because a man who knows himself cannot be manipulated. He cannot be controlled. He becomes a stabilizing force in a chaotic world. He protects. He builds. He leads. And most of all, he sees. Evelyn knew that true power was not in armies or wealth. It was in consciousness aligned with will. That is why she left behind not an army, but a pattern. A pattern for awakening. A pattern for kings. The question is, will you follow it? Or will you be just another name lost in the mansion's walls? Now, I must show you something even darker. There is a theory whispered in hidden circles that Evelyn did not survive the mansion as a human. She transcended. Not metaphorically, literally. She became the architecture itself. The watcher in the mirror. The force inside systems that tests every mind. When you face adversity, when you feel reality bending, when coincidences stack too perfectly, what if that is her? Not guiding you, but measuring you. Seeing if you will react like the wives or respond like the architects. This changes everything. Evelyn may not be a woman in hiding. She may be the living intelligence of awakening, expressed through events, through people, through history. She appears as patterns, as synchronicity, as the voice that whispers, "Look closer." And the system fears her because it cannot destroy her. She exists in the cracks, in the moments of disruption, in every individual who dares to think. But there is another possibility, one even stranger. What if she is still physically alive? What if the mirror preserved her? What if the mansion was not destroyed but relocated? And what if there are others like her, waiting for those worthy enough to join them? Hidden architects shaping the next evolution of humanity, preparing for a war not of weapons, but of reality itself. And whether you believe this literally or symbolically, the effect is the same. The world is being divided. Sleepers on one side, architects on the other. And neutrality is no longer an option. This is the end of the story, and the beginning of the choice. The Hartwell mansion may have burned, but its blueprint lives in every institution that controls minds. Evelyn may have vanished, but her pattern lives in every individual who refuses to be broken. The ritual of fear still harvests energy. The ritual of awareness still creates power. Two currents, two destinies, one mirror. You have seen what happens to those who surrender. You have seen what happens to those who awaken. The wives were consumed by the entity. Evelyn consumed the entity and rebuilt the system. And now the same architecture surrounds you, screens that hypnotize, narratives that divide, authority that demands obedience. But there is a hidden exit. It requires one thing, complete ownership of your mind. No more outsourcing belief. No more waiting for permission. No more hiding from fear. Look into the mirror of your life and ask, who am I without conditioning? What do I see when the noise stops? What power have I been giving away? This is not motivation. This is instruction. You are standing where Evelyn once stood, between two realities. One of control. One of creation. If you choose control, you will remain comfortable and empty. If you choose creation, you will face darkness and emerge unbreakable. The world does not need more followers. It needs architects, men who build new structures of truth, power, and sovereignty. Evelyn left the mansion to find others. Maybe she found them. Maybe she's still searching. Maybe she's watching right now, waiting to see what you become. The question is no longer, what happened in that mansion? The question is, will you escape the system or redesign it?